Here we go. This content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained on here constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Draper, Goren, Holm, or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments whatsoever. And also, we have a proud media partner, Blockchain and Booze, and they actually help us basically broadcast this onto their network after we finish the panel. So we can get a little bit more exposure on that side and rep each of you guys on another level. So with that being said, cheers to that amazing disclaimer that everyone loves so much. I want to thank you guys for joining us. And let's actually start with a round of introductions. We'll go from Alex, Derek, and then end with Peter.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm super excited to participate in today's panel. My name is Alex Melikhov. I am the CEO of Equilibrium. Equilibrium is building the first interoperable money markets based on the Polkadot technology. I've been in the space for quite a while. I'm an engineer in applied mathematics by training. I was always, involved in, fintech and technological projects. In 2016, we co-founded Changelly. You probably heard of us. We're one of the biggest instant exchanges on the markets so far. Since 2017, me and my team we're mostly focused on decentralized applications. We started our journey with the development on Ethereum. Then we were looking for more scalability, more kind of network capacity, and switched our efforts to building things on EOS. And now we're here building kind of logical extension of our product line on EOS, currently on Polkadot. So that's what's going on my side.
Awesome, thank you, Derek.
Sure. So Derek Yu, I'm the CEO of PureStake. The main project that we're putting most of our energy into these days is a project called Moonbeam. That is also a project that we're building on the Polkadot network. And I would say that we really a big part of the motivation for the project is around interoperability, particularly interoperability between Ethereum and Polkadot, is where we've been spending quite a bit of time. So. Definitely drawn to like problems of interoperability. I think that's what led us to kind of Polkadot in the first place. And I'm pretty excited to talk about cross-chain interoperability.
Cool, awesome. And Peter?
Hey, my name is Peter Mauric. I'm head of public affairs at Parity Technologies, the development company behind the Polkadot network, to bring it all together. Very excited to be working with both Alex and Derek on really fulfilling the promise of what Gav first laid out in the Polkadot paper, I think about 4 years ago, the vision of a blockchain network that would connect all existing and future blockchain networks, as well as provide a path for new applications to scale in new and interesting ways by providing a design space that is as new to blockchain today as Ethereum was back in 2014. So been excited to be a part of this launch recently, obviously, getting Polkadot up and running and everything that went along with that over the past 3 years, helping guide strategy, communications, policy, and now sort of moving forward with the development of Polkadot, I'm looking to focus in quite a lot more on sort of the governance between both Polkadot and all of these parachain networks. I'm excited about really creating a level of interoperability and connectivity between communities in a way we haven't seen in the blockchain space thus far.
Awesome. And I think a good way to start this is for those who haven't heard of Polkadot yet, could you kind of compare and contrast it to Ethereum's blockchain or Bitcoin's blockchain, right? Just so we can get a general understanding and the takeaways behind that.
Sure. So if we want to talk about sort of how we see the evolution of the Web3 crypto blockchain space, obviously the genesis of everything was with Bitcoin, and it proved that the tech stack that Satoshi introduced would be a viable trustless distributed system that everyone can trust and build with and build on. But it was obviously a bit restrictive in terms of what you could do with it, considering it was a sort of first of its kind simplistic protocol. Ethereum came soon after, well, not too soon after, but a little while after, and added basically a scripting programming language on top of a fairly basic blockchain infrastructure, meaning that you could build these new things called decentralized applications. You could have more complex contracts between 2, 3, 100 parties on a trustless protocol based on blockchain and cryptographic technologies. But today we find ourselves in a place where there are a lot of different interesting blockchains shooting sort of off in different directions, siloed and only really understanding what's going on within their own contained ecosystem. So Polkadot we see really as the sort of third big paradigm shift within the blockchain industry, allowing those or providing the technology that will allow those previously siloed networks to communicate in a truly interoperable fashion, not something just so as simple as a atomic swap, but actually be able to execute contracts across chain. But Polkadot also offers what we sort of talk about, this new paradigm of interoperability and scalability within the network itself via parachains like what Alex and Derek are developing with Moonbeam and Equilibrium, which are optimized domain-specific blockchains, layer ones in their own regard, that are more optimized than a smart contract cluster could ever be on Ethereum. But they obviously have a higher barrier to entry in terms of like the skill and quality of developer necessary to build such a system. So I'll let Alex and Derek sort of fill in the gaps as they see it. But overall, I think that's sort of how we've approached the positioning and development of Polkadot over the past 3 years.
Okay, cool. And I think also another good place to start, just so we're kind of defining the key terms, I would love for each of you guys to define what interoperability really means, I guess in your own definition and how you guys view that as the future of Web3. So give a breakdown on what that means exactly from the core perspective, and we can kind of go from each person. So starting with Alex.
Yeah, so for us, actually, as a DeFi project, interoperability means a lot because we've had a lot of experience in building dApps and specifically decentralized finance applications, and obviously we always been actually limited by certain boundaries of particular blockchain ecosystem that we've been developing on, and we always been thinking of like obtaining more interoperability in order to bring more liquidity into our products. So from kind of application layer perspective, we think that it will definitely bring interoperability itself and the way how we develop on Polkadot will bring certain kind of decent amount of liquidity, and it will drive quite a lot of attention from the various community, various blockchain community, various blockchain ecosystem to our product line. So from user perspective, we're actually aiming to deliver kind of seamless user experience, so that user would not necessarily be interacting with our Polkadot-based engine, but more like interacting with dedicated smart contracts on the kind of corresponding blockchains, like on Ethereum, Tezos, whatever blockchains will be bridged with Polkadot eventually. And from technical perspective, like we do have certain, kind of definition of interoperability, which means that basically assets should be transferable between chains. Then one chain should be understanding the kind of the final states of another blockchain, right? And actually make certain decisions on the operations within its kind of business logics. So it's kind of straightforward. There are kind of few points that we need to achieve from technical perspective in terms of like building interoperable applications. they're quite easy to understand, like, you know, the finality, the transferability of assets, and kind of making the decisions within one blockchain depending on the state and another. But from technical perspective, it's obviously a more sophisticated thing, and takes a lot of efforts in terms of the development. And yeah, and we are super excited that, you know, Polkadot has done a lot of progress in terms of like delivering this interoperability experience, and so we are super excited to build you know, our applications off of that.
Awesome. And Derek, how do you guys kind of view interoperability? And maybe we could also take it, if you were to explain interoperability to an 8th grader, okay? And the reason I bring this up is because it will be aired on Blockchain Radio afterwards, and we, in our audience right now, we have people of all different expertise. Right. So if you could explain and define interoperability to an 8th grader and how you guys view interoperability as the future of Web3, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would first start with maybe the question of like, why is it important even in the first place? And I think, you know, for us, it's the fact that there's just all of these different blockchains, but they're all islands basically, right? And, you know, interoperability has historically been, you know, something that's not very good between these different chains. That's led to this, you know, kind of, I would say, a lot of activity happening on Ethereum, because you kind of avoid problems of cross-chain interoperability by just being on the same chain. However, you kind of see that these days, you know, that's becoming increasingly challenging, because everyone going to the same place means that it gets quite congested. And, you know, the solution has got to be to have multiple chains. I mean, even within Ethereum itself, right, that's the Ethereum 2.0 plan, is to create essentially multiple chain shards, as they're calling them. So that is, you know, this kind of multi-chain, like, you know, even if you go within each individual blockchain ecosystem, is kind of, that's where things are trending, is to have multiple chains. And so if, you know, to answer your question of how I'd explain this, I focus, there's many different interoperability scenarios, but I think the most basic one that's easiest to understand is just token movement scenarios, right? So if you have an asset on a chain, how does it get to another chain? And, you know, in my mind, there's kind of 3 different approaches that you see, you know, out in the market, or in the wild. You know, the first one is pretty straightforward. I'll call it kind of the centralized model. So if you have something like Tether, for example, right? So Tether as an asset exists on multiple chains. There's a kind of a single kind of, you know, institution behind it that's issuing that asset, you know, onto multiple chains. So in one sense, you get kind of interoperability between chains by having the same asset on multiple chains, but it is something where there's an actual company just issuing kind of the assets, you know, onto multiple chains, right? You can, I guess I've never tried this myself, but you can go to Bitfinex and you can say, hey, this Tether is on, you know, Ethereum, I want to move it, you know, to another chain, right? So I'll call that kind of the centralized model of interoperability. You know, then there's like this other class that are called bridges, right? Bridged interoperability. So you can have these bridges that allow you to move assets from one chain to another. And there's a bunch of examples of these days. You know, there's, you know, you can see this like Wrapped BTC on Ethereum these days is going to be a bridge. And usually how that works is you kind of set up this bridge, and then you kind of put native assets in on one side, and you get these like wrapped versions out the other side, right? That's kind of how these bridges work. And there's a bunch of projects pursuing these strategies, and that's generally the strategy that, you know, you need to pursue if you have dissimilar, you know, kind of blockchains on either side. These bridging mechanisms are the way to go. And there's even like a whole taxonomy, even if you drill into bridges, there's this whole spectrum of different trust assumptions going from relatively trusted to relatively trust minimized. So there's a whole kind of sub area underneath there, but I categorize them all as bridged. And, you know, the last category I'd call it doesn't really have an official name, but I call it native, right? So it's something where, you know, token movement is kind of designed into the system. And so Polkadot, I think, is a good example of that, where, you know, within the Polkadot system, you know, it's designed in such a way that assets can move between the member blockchains, these parachains that are within Polkadot, and it's kind of a full move, right? So like an asset leaves like chain A and it appears on chain B. And that's kind of only possible because all, you know, the whole system is kind of operating under this, is part of the same system, right? It's operating under the same security context or same security umbrella. And that's really only possible when you've designed this kind of interoperability into the system. And that's like a much kind of a much more cleaner and kind of more scalable way to do interoperability than these bridges. And it's only possible because it was designed, that way from the start. So I kind of think about those three categories. And I think, it's not that, there's, it's all going to be one or the other. They're all going to coexist. But this new native category is quite, it's quite new, basically, right? So I think Polkadot, has it. I think Cosmos, is also doing some work in this area. But this is kind of a new class of interoperability that, that's something that really drew us, to even work with Polkadot in the first place, and is going to open up new possibilities.
Yeah, and someone in the chat mentioned part of it is sort of based around standards. It's not necessarily standards in the way the IETF sets internet standards, but I mentioned in the chat that sort of the standard that allows this internal operability within Polkadot that Derek mentioned, that's really powerful, and a new design space is the blockchain building framework developed by Parity Technology is called Substrate, which is the toolkit, the framework, the SDK, whatever you want to call it, that teams like Alex's and Derek's are using to build their own customized blockchains with a lot less overhead. Obviously, it still requires a talented development team, but when you have chains that are more or less based on the same framework, connected to a chain like Polkadot providing security, it gives you that technical standard, that technical underpinning that allows for really, again, what we sort of refer to as true interoperability. So rather than it's a token here gets locked in a smart contract and then it's a wrapped version of that token on another chain, this is actually assets moving between chains. And that's only made possible by having a building framework like Substrate that chains within Polkadot, these parachains or these shards are using. If anyone wants to dig deeper into that as just like a technical level and the really cool, interesting things that it might make possible, Gav gave a really great talk on blockchain mergers and acquisitions at Consensus this year, and explains specifically why like having true interoperability and a standard like Substrate will allow for chains that want to collaborate with each other very closely, or potentially even chains that want to overtake other chains to do so in a technically final way.
Okay, so I want to touch upon what kind of Derek jumped into. You talked a lot about Wrapped BTC, right, and how that's a bridge between Bitcoin's blockchain and Ethereum's blockchain, right? And I've been seeing a lot on crypto Twitter that there's been a lot of activity around that type of bridge, right? Can you give us more of a rundown of what that is exactly? What does it mean to wrap something, wrap Bitcoin, for those who don't understand, and what are some of the pros and cons of doing so?
Sure. Yeah, happy to answer that. So, I mean, that's kind of in that, I've described these three categories:
right,
centralized, bridge, and native. So we're in the middle, the kind of the bridged category now. And so the way these bridges work is at a high level is basically like this. So you once you set up a bridge between two chains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, basically the way it works is you basically deposit, there's 1 foot of the bridge is kind of on each chain, right? So you have 1 foot of the bridge on Bitcoin, you have 1 foot of the bridge on Ethereum. And so then on the Bitcoin network, you kind of send Bitcoin to that side of the bridge. The asset gets locked there, right? So it's kind of locked and immobilized on that side of the bridge. And then on the Ethereum side of the bridge, you kind of create a new asset. So you create this new asset, in this case, it's typically an ERC20 token that kind of represents the locked asset that's on the far side of the bridge. So you think of it this way, that the wrapped asset that's being issued on the Ethereum side, it's kind of like a redeemable note, right? It's like a note that you can start to pass around on Ethereum. You can spend it or kind of put it into DeFi. But essentially, anyone who gets that note can kind of come back to the Ethereum side of the bridge, give the note back, and then reclaim kind of the original asset that's on the remote side of the chain. So kind of on the way back, you kind of destroy the note, and then that like unlocks the original asset, in this case on the Bitcoin side of the bridge. So it's kind of this mechanism where, if the bridge is heavily used, there'll be like a whole bunch of assets kind of locked up on one side and a whole bunch of these kind of redeemable notes kind of issued like on the other side of the bridge. And so obviously that's happening now because I think a lot of people want to get, Bitcoin and kind of the value of Bitcoin like into, particularly these DeFi protocols that are,
right,
getting a lot of traction on Ethereum these days.
Got you. Now, so what would you guys say? What's some of the potential that interoperability brings to external network versus internal network from a cross-chain composability point of view, right? And Peter, I think this one I'd like to get your point of view on this. So when you're talking about external networks versus internal networks, right? What's the benefit and I guess the potential of getting those two to mesh together from a cross-chain composability point of view?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'll set this up for Alex because this is really along the lines of what he's working on with Equilibrium, right? We're looking towards a future where there are going to be several, if not many. It's up to debate whether there's going to be several or many significant, successful chains that are providing this sort of layer for development. I don't think anyone really believes anymore it's just going to be one. But in terms of sort of the external network interoperability, being able to build applications, decentralized applications on more than one network at once, for one, that for me is a point of decentralization and redundancy for a service. So it just simply makes sense that if you have a decentralized application that you want to be up and running and have it available to as many people as possible, you will want that application to exist on more than one base layer chain, and those applications to be able to talk to each other in order to keep state within whatever the purpose of your DApp is. That's sort of like one of the core value propositions for network external interoperability. And a lot of this is based on what Derek was talking about in terms of bridging core networks like Polkadot, Ethereum, and others, so that you can build an Ethereum application or a Polkadot application, but not have to sort of lock yourself into one network. You can access audiences, developer networks, and value and activity on a number of networks at once, which is a really exciting thing. The sort of internal operability piece is what Derek referred to as a native interoperability. And we're really excited about this new design space that Polkadot introduces, and that you are really going to be able for the first time to compose applications that take interesting pieces of technology off of numerous chains at once. So on Polkadot, there is going to be 1, 2, 3, several parachains that are optimized for either stable coins or DeFi, and there's going to be specific pieces of that might fit your use case really well. But at the same time, you spent a bunch of time building an Ethereum application that does some of the key sort of nuts and bolts of the interactions within your application, and you can use something like Moonbeam to sort of port that work over without too much extra effort. And now you have an application that is both leveraging an optimized stablecoin chain or DeFi chain on Polkadot. You're not having to do double the work to compose your application, because something like Moonbeam is giving you the capability to duplicate your Ethereum application on Polkadot, and you have access to a bridge so that you're existing on more than one chain at once. So you're both redundant in terms of having your operations on more than one infrastructure layer, and also accessing more network effects and more technology all at the same time. So it's a win-win-win in a lot of ways in order to have internal, external, and this sort of code interoperability between chains.
Cool. And Alex, I'd kind of love to get your point of view as well, considering it's like your bread and butter.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter actually has touched on almost all the aspects that we are working on. Super, thanks so much. And in addition to that, I would say that we are really looking forward to the parachain functionality launched on Polkadot, and specifically looking forward to launching the messaging system, because it will deliver the true internal interoperability when we can exchange messages and basically move assets across the Polkadot network. So from this perspective, we always been asked how we foresee the future of DeFi and Polkadot, how we position ourselves compared to some other DeFi projects. I always say that we think that all the DeFi projects on Polkadot actually complementing each other. Because one of the reasons why it's happening, it's because of this internal interoperability, right? Because we at some point will be able to interact between kind of our parachain and other parachains to considering that as the whole united space of decentralized finance on Polkadot. For sure, we are looking forward to integration with some bridging technologies that are coming to Polkadot as well, like external bridges with some external networks like Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever. There are some several interesting solutions in terms of that, but obviously it's everything that related to the external bridging is actually means that there are some wrapped asset generation on top of these bridges. However, we actually think that if bridge delivers some sort of messaging functionality as well, we can easily basically interact with external like smart contracts or whatever, which will deliver seamless user experience, as I said. Seems like you're muted, Adam.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
It happens all the time. I'm glad you caught it. Thank you. So I was starting to say I want to jump more into the Ethereum side of things, okay? And starting with asking you guys, what are some of the shortcomings of Ethereum layer 2 solutions, right? And that's the first part. And the follow-on question would be, why should teams be planning on cross and multi-chain friendly rather than unitary or sidechain focused?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm happy to jump in on that one.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, so I would say that, right now, obviously, we kind of touched on it already. There is, increasing gas fees. When the latest kind of meme vegetable coin comes out, that kind of sends the gas fees kind of skyrocketing, and it's leading to a bunch of challenges for many projects, on Ethereum, and that's forced them to look and kind of figure out what their scalability solution is. So I think that, as you say, there's obviously a number of projects and teams building different kinds of scalability solutions that, on Ethereum, whether they be, I divide them into two camps really. I mean, there's kind of roll-up style approaches, either ZK, optimistic. There's actually a few different sub-varieties at this point, or sidechain based approaches like, you have Matic, OMG. There's a number of solutions that kind of fall into that category. And I guess the way I look at this is that, those are all actually different chains. I mean, they just happen to be situated very close to Ethereum, but they're all, different chains of some kind. And in general, many of them are kind of optimizing for transaction throughput, right? In the design of a blockchain, you can always optimize for something, right? And so they're optimizing for transaction throughput. I do think, though, that for many of them, it's kind of like you're solving kind of the immediate problem at hand, but you're going to hit like the next problem, like pretty soon after. You can already see this starting to happen. So, let's say you have, a scalable layer 2 solution, you kind of move into that, but it's kind of like, well, then what? It's like, so I've moved my assets into this other chain. I've achieved like a lot of speed. So I have a lot of transaction throughput, but, I'm a little bit all by my lonesome then, like on this chain, right? So I think you already see people starting to realize that and saying, okay, well, can we kind of connect the layer 2s then, or can we, can we build a bridge to the layer 2? But in my mind, that's a little bit backwards. You kind of have to design in this interoperability from the start in order to not, get kind of dead-ended, right? If that makes sense. So, that's kind of the way I look at it. Is all these solutions are similar in the sense that you're moving your assets, off of the base layer to something else, and there's different design trade-offs on what that other thing is. For us, we feel that having kind of interoperability built into that other thing kind of gives you like many options then, right? So if you move your assets into a chain that kind of has this native ability to talk to and get to other places, then it's kind of feels less constrained than, if you're just kind of have, not as many interoperability choices, right, in that place that you're moving to.
Okay, and Peter or Alex, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to add to that, that you can spend the whole life, replicating your logics on various blockchains. And actually, from a developer perspective, it definitely takes time, to enter any blockchain platform in order to roll out some applications there. So for us at Equilibrium, we've actually decided to build the true interoperable system that will likely interact the whole bunch of blockchain platforms eventually. So that for us, the scalability in terms of like connecting new blockchains into our product line would just come to actually melt down to just building the bridge if the bridge doesn't exist, or the integration of some existing bridges that would be delivered by some independent team.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Polkadot layer one sort of parachains offer more scalability because of this interoperability. And oh, by the way, there's also layer two being built for parachains if they need to offload specific pieces of their computation. So Plasma, rollups, all of that will also be available as additional scalability add-ons for Polkadot parachains when they need it. Obviously, having your own chain means you have a lot more throughput to start. But we're also planning for, and there are also teams out there planning for the time when we need to make it to the next level. I think Andreas Antonopoulos gave a great talk about this a year or so ago when he was talking about interoperability. And he says, if a computer or a internet infrastructure provider is going to give me more capacity they don't think I can use, I'm going to prove them wrong and use it. So we always have to be ready to go to the next level. So things like having layer two available on Polkadot for parachains, if and when it gets to that, is a part of that. And then obviously, maybe not obviously, the sort of next iteration of Polkadot is allowing for you to shard shards. So Alex's or Derek's parachains could then become sharded parachains, the sort of para relay chains, nested relay chains in of themselves. So you could run 100 parachains inside of a relay, or 100 more parachains inside of a single para relay chain, providing the sort of exponential scaling. And then you add layer two on top of that. And the hope is you can do sort of whatever you want and use all the capacity you want, like Andreas Antonopoulos like to screw with his internet providers and do.
That felt like such a inception to some degree.
It is absolutely blockchain inception
within
happening.
and within. and for those who don't know what sharding is, can you give us a quick, just super brief definition, just so they can wrap their hand around what you just pitched?
Sure. So Ethereum 2 and Polkadot are both sharded blockchains. Sharding is a technique used for quite a long time in scaling databases. It basically splits the data and the transaction volume across many different instances, and then allows you to reconcile it at the end. So sharding basically means you are breaking all of the work being done in a blockchain into 100 smaller blockchains running in parallel. The difference between Ethereum 2 and Polkadot is that every shard on Ethereum 2.0 is basically exactly the same. It just gives you an EVM execution environment to run smart contracts, and the hope is that they'll just sort of be clusters of projects on different shards, and they won't get in each other's way, and will scale that way. We don't think that's the right approach, which is why Polkadot shards are heterogeneous, meaning everyone sort of gets to own their own shard, optimize it for their use case, and then talk to everyone else. So Equilibrium and Derek's project and Moonbeam are going to be their own shards, whereas on Ethereum 2.0, they would sort of have to exist in a cluster of smart contracts, maybe on one shard, and hope that shard doesn't get too full. And if it gets too full, maybe move to another one. It doesn't necessarily, it's a very general approach that doesn't necessarily give really dedicated projects the guarantees they need to know that they're going to be in a place to fill their capacity needs.
Perfect.
You can imagine a DeFi shard, or a shard where a lot of the DeFi applications meet up on Ethereum 2, running into a lot of the exact same problems that they're seeing on Ethereum 1.0, because they're basically filling up an entire chain already themselves. So they're going to have to separate, and then you get into all sorts of other issues and sort of the composability between those applications. And these are all things that Polkadot is going to solve.
Perfect. Next into the QA, and actually bring up someone who has one of the highest rated questions. His name is Samuel Miller. I'm going to bring him up. Let's see if he gets my notification. I kind of want to bring him up because he asks an interesting question. Here we go. What's up, Samuel?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. How's it going, man?
Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
Cool.
Could you go ahead and ask them the question that you had written down?
Yeah, so I said there are many projects built with Ethereum. They've all been, very dedicated to bridging traditional finance with DeFi, scalability, proof of stake with Ethereum 2.0. So my main question is, how does Polkadot plan to use parachains to really stand out? I know Peter just mentioned that Ethereum 2.0 may have some drawbacks to it, long term. So I guess my follow-up to that would be, does Polkadot have any plans if and when there are more fierce competition, I guess?
You're talking about competition between parachains or between Ethereum and Polkadots for specific projects? I can say for and this sort of also goes into the other question in the Q&A about the difference between Polkadot and Cosmos. So I think these are actually maybe the three protocols that people compare the most, at least to date, is Ethereum to Polkadot and Cosmos as sort of the main competitors. Would that be, that's sort of along the lines of what you're asking, how we sort of differentiate ourselves?
Yeah. Me personally, I'm very excited about Polkadot, all the technology involved, but I've heard many people say, yeah, Polkadot's cool, it's very exciting, but a lot of these new investors don't realize that there are other chains that have been working on these similar solutions, and they are miles ahead of Polkadot. So I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Well, I'd push back on the idea that other chains are miles ahead of Polkadot. Considering, and I think Zaki from Cosmos tweeted this in the past couple months or so, if Polkadot delivers on everything that the team, Gav, and everyone else has promised, it will be a really significant, massive shift for the entire industry. So you could say that some chains, sort of linear, uncharted chains, are pushing TPS limits that we haven't seen before, which is really exciting. You could say that some chains are reaching sort of new levels of decentralization. But I think that what we're trying to target with Polkadot is sort of this Goldilocks zone where we're both scalable enough in order to give projects the design space they need to flourish. We're allowing them to connect with each other and compose applications between optimized chains with the same ease that you're able to compose applications using clusters of Ethereum smart contracts. And I think the main differentiating fact is that by using Substrate, we're giving developers coming into the space quality development teams that really want to step up their game from being focused on building smart contracts for their application, which tend to be inefficient and bloaty and gas hungry, to be able to use Substrate and build a optimized chain without having to hire a development team of 40 or 50 or 100 like we have at Polkadot. You can have a core smaller group of really talented developers and rely on the experience of Gav and his team, having built more layer one blockchains really than any other team in the space, and really having innovated all along the way to do a lot of the development work obviously it's highly tested and audited, but not every blockchain in the world needs to build their own networking and build their own consensus and build their own governance. And we're providing basically the paint and the brushes necessary for a team to build their project from the ground up, like in a customized blockchain, without having to build a team of 50, 100 people to do it. So that reducing the barrier to entry for a team to build a customized blockchain where they can deliver something that's really high quality with a bit less work is really going to, I think, create a new paradigm for builders in the space, where you're not just going to see smart contract developers, but you're going to start to see more dedicated blockchain runtime engineers who are specialized in launching chains using a framework like Substrate, which makes it really easy to build something that's really powerful.
Awesome. I want to jump further into the QA. And Samuel, thanks for that awesome question. Next question comes from an anonymous user, and this might be a very general question, but I think it's important to target. How important is open source to blockchain interoperability? And feel free, Alex, Derek, or Peter, to take that one up.
I'll go ahead. I mean, I would say that for most blockchain protocols, I mean, they're under open source license. It's pretty rare to find any kind of core protocol code that's under a closed source license. The reason for that is I think that the ability to look at the source code is really part of like what allows people to trust like the system and trust that there's no like, hey, on the 53rd day of like of the year, like all the funds go to me or something like this, right? So just being able to, the same thing with other open source code that's kind of at the infrastructure layer, like OpenSSL and other things that people rely on from a security perspective. I think there's just an expectation that it's open source, and that's just I think you'd be pretty hard pressed these days to try to like launch some sort of blockchain under a closed source license that's permissionless and kind of trying to attack these same use cases as like Ethereum, Polkadot, Cosmos, these chains that we were just talking about. I don't really see how that would be possible. I know that some projects, even with patents, have come under some fire, right? Even if they're trying to patent some of the ideas in there, you start to get backlash basically on that.
It's also one of the questions: is it possible to patent a blockchain interoperability strategy tool, whatever it may be? So, but you're saying the community actually goes against that, right?
Yeah, it's possible, but you start getting some haters, I think.
There are plenty of attempts to patent stuff out there, both sort of my previous life was in public affairs, strategic consulting, advisory for all kinds of industries in the US. And one of the campaigns I helped run way back when was a campaign against patent trolls in Illinois. So there's plenty of large scale US enterprises, I won't name, that have patented plenty of different blockchain scalability, interoperability solutions. It's rampant. There's definitely also plenty of legitimate open source projects in the space that will at times turn to just at least holding a patent on something to protect it from someone like an IBM, like patenting it before them. So there is that sort of patent defense strategy against patent trolls by patenting something and then open sourcing it, which is obviously something that we would support. But Web3 Foundation, Parity, we are 100% open source 100% of the time. Like Derek mentioned, there are some high-profile teams supported by other high-profile networks that have both developed closed source and patented and otherwise tried to package and sell their technology. And I don't think that's what Polkadot and Web3 should be about.
I don't think that's what the general crypto community is about, right? I know
Correct.
We're getting a lot of discussions about fair launches, right? That has become a topic of discussion recently. I think as transparent and as free and as community driven you can create something, the more traction you're going to get early on from what we're seeing, right? At least that's from what I've seen. Maybe you guys have seen something else, right? For the most part. The next thing I want to kind of dive into is, and I find this really interesting specifically because all this interoperability stuff, it happens underneath the hood. You'll never notice, assuming you'll never notice that this happens, right? that the Ethereum's blockchain interacts with some other blockchain or Bitcoin's blockchain, whatever it may be. How close are we actually to complete blockchain interoperability? And I put it in air quotes because I personally believe we have a very long way, because adoption is not even as where it should be yet, or where it can be. But I'd kind of love to hear from you guys. We can start with Alex, Derek, and then work our way to Peter.
From my perspective, it's kind of long journey. We're still quite far from that, and despite like quite a lot of solutions popping up on the markets, like including Polkadot and some other platforms that are designed to deliver this kind of interoperability, they're still not fully in production, and we definitely will see like more developments on this front. We are watching closely after several projects that will build specifically bridges for Polkadot, but still they're just developing what they're going to deliver, and that will definitely take time. We anticipate like some horizons of maybe Q1 next year, when we will have some hands-on experience with several prominent bridges, but still after just bridges delivery, it will take time for the overall interoperability of the space.
So maybe what I could also add to that before to get there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would echo Alex's thoughts that it's still early days. And I mean, sometimes I think about this analogy, right? So if you think about just computers, right? Early days of computers, I feel like, think about like an unnetworked, like a single multitasking but unnetworked computer. That's kind of like what like Ethereum is, right? So you have this one thing, it doesn't talk to anything else, but you can run multiple programs on it, like via smart contracts. And then, I mean, I was actually around, I'm going to date myself a little bit, like when these first internet days came out, it was still pretty raw. I mean, you could get on the internet, but it was like pretty rough around the edges. And I feel like that's the era we're going into, is kind of this like AOL early Netscape kind of like era of things, where I was give you some example. Like, I met a guy once that like worked in the early days of Netscape, and he was explaining to me also like, their homepage, this was in like the Netscape 2.0 era. So this is quite some time ago, was getting like overloaded, like with like all the requests. As people downloaded the software, you fired it up, it would like load the Netscape homepage. So then you had all of a sudden like, 1 million people hitting this like Netscape homepage back in the day. So it was just getting overloaded. It was like one server somewhere. So the solution they came up with was they put in like, he said they put in client-side load balancing. So like when Netscape fired up, it would choose like, www1 or 2 or 3. It would like put in a random number, and then you'd go to like that machine. And so it sounds like incredibly rudimentary, like to us now with all these sophisticated things exist, but that's the kind of era I think we're headed into, where it's kind of like solving kind of basic problems like this, and kind of like, in kind of ways to just kind of get, to solve the kind of immediate problem at hand. And then I contrast that with, I mean, if you look at just like what modern web infrastructure looks like, I mean, the previous company where I was, I mean, we had multi-cloud deployment with like, composing many different, database services, SendGrid for sending emails. Like, we had many different specialized kind of web-based services we're combining together across multiple cloud environments. And then as the user, it's all that complexity, you're kind of abstracted away, right? You're just interacting with something simple, but then there's all this complexity behind the scenes. I kind of see that as we're far from that, right? But that's ultimately, where we have to move towards. In the short term, there's going to be this very painful conscious awareness of like all of the different things you're interacting with, right? It's going to kind of, the pain will be foisted on the user a bit first, before those edges get like, kind of sanded down, and you kind of get to this more, this way to kind of hide the complexity. That's kind of what I anticipate happening.
Yeah, to bring it back, I love that history lesson, Derek. We need to be cognizant that we are sort of going, what was the show that said history is a flat circle? We really are coming around again. It was the detective show, True Detective. To bring it back to where we are now in terms of like what it takes to get to true interoperability, For me, it comes down to a couple of things. And one, I think, is a key differentiator between things like Polkadot, which introduces true interoperability, and sort of the existing blockchain 2.5 sort of solutions like Cosmos. And that's something Alex has touched on, is that ability that for Polkadot to not just transfer value, transfer tokens, but also transfer arbitrary data and computational calls across chains. So you can use Polkadot to do a contract call from one chain to Ethereum and back in a way that a Cosmos, which is more closely akin to like a multi-chain atomic swap protocol, is able to do. So Polkadot introduces a layer of interoperability that literally does not exist in the blockchain space today, which is a massive step. And I think harkens back to that comment that Zaki from Cosmos made a little while back, is if we're able to deliver on this, we're going to have helped the blockchain space, the crypto space, the Web3 space forward a massive amount. And if you wanted to check out Gavin Wood's Twitter feed, we're currently passing messages back and forth between parachains in testnet, and we've got bridges to all the major networks under development. So we're really excited to move forward and connect this entire space, because at the end of the day, that's really great for everyone.
Awesome. And just to kind of touch upon, we're running out of time. So what is, and this one comes from Justin Cooper, what is Polkadot's plan to handle high transaction/gas fees for cross-chain calls and transfers?
So,
if any,
you're talking about potential congestion on the relay chain for managing transactions between parachains. This is potentially something that Alex and Derek have a little bit more in-depth technical knowledge than I do. But just to give the overall, not that we want to, live in a world where we're all comparing transaction per second stats back and forth, but based on the benchmarking that's been done on Substrate and Polkadot, and Gav tweeted this a little while back, we're starting at a baseline of at least 1,000, 1,500 TPS on a single substrate-based chain before any optimizations, no layer 2, no rollups. And when you bundle it all together, that means Polkadot eventually will likely be able to, in the medium term, process in the millions of transactions per second, which is completely ridiculous and unnecessary numbers. But like Andreas Antonopoulos said, I mentioned before, you give developers the capacity, they'll figure out a way to use it. But in terms of this idea that there could be congestion and gas fees and in terms of passing messages between on bridges or on the relay chain, there's a lot of optimizations built into Substrate as a blockchain building framework, which allows you to optimize your chain and optimize all these transactions so that you don't run into the bloated gas market the way that you see on Ethereum. Individual parachain projects don't even need to have gas or tokens on their chain necessarily. So it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. We are really launching an entirely new sort of paradigm for crypto.
I love it. And Alex, Derek, would you guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I think that just the one problem that it will face in terms of bridging with other blockchains, that will at some point run into gas costs on these blockchains. So, for example, if we want to interact with Ethereum and provide user with such UX that they're actually like managing our Polkadot-based technology through the bridge, which actually technically possible, right? Because we can receive data on Ethereum, pass it through the bridge, and then just make decisions depending on this data that we receive on our kind of parachain, do some certain actions. But in terms of that, there will be some costs on Ethereum involved, and we actually cannot do that much with that, right? So that might be the congestion that we eventually will run into.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think from our perspective, the design of the system of Polkadot itself, like really minimizes the work that the the center relay chain has to do and moves like all of the lifting out to the edges of the network, right? So that's to the parachains themselves. So I think that's kind of a good design from our perspective. And then it's kind of up to the people building the chains, like like the chain we're building, to kind of figure out what we want to build. Yeah, I would say that the thing that I think is interesting for us is that even when we're speaking with, the chain we're building is itself a smart contracts chain. So we're creating a chain that itself is a developer kind of platform. But there's just choices, right? So like even if we talk to a project and they deploy onto our parachain that's offering this kind of Ethereum compatible environment, they may outgrow that, and that's fine. I mean, that they have this kind of upgrade path then, where they can upgrade then to a full like application specific blockchain if and when like those needs arise. So I think that that's something that is a subtlety, but is an important thing, where I think when a lot of other choices people are making, it's kind of this thing that you kind of have to live with for a long time, and you don't have a lot of options once you've like moved into it. So that's a pretty attractive feature, I think, for us, is that you kind of have this ability to scale yourself up and down, and you have different choices you can make. And then because like all these different chains can talk to each other, you could even gradually migrate or kind of graduate up to something that requires more work but has more scalability, and or scale it even back down without needing to kind of say, oh, I made a mistake, I made a wrong choice, and I have to go kind of replatform myself again somewhere. So I think that's
just
powerful.
Adding to Derek's point about the relay chain already being offloading as much of the work as possible onto the sort of, I don't want to say periphery, but the layer ones connected to it. Having the core function of the relay chain being the security function is key. So there's also a lot of talk about offloading even more infrastructure from the relay chain onto a parachain. So you could imagine a future where currently the governance structure of Polkadot is executed on the relay chain as code on the relay chain, but it wouldn't be very difficult to launch a governance specific parachain to offload the governance transaction work from the relay chain onto a parachain, that then the parachain just references this governance parachain as Polkadot's sort of layer 0 governance. So a lot of work there, but not necessarily a major concern that we have, like Derek said, like we have in Ethereum.
And I also wanted to add that the substrate technology itself actually delivers certain core functionality which offloads the chain itself, like for example off-chain workers, right, which deliver certain kind of functionality that you can move out of the chain and simultaneously have the kind of trustless transaction performed by validators. So from this perspective, it makes a lot of sense from the cost of resources perspective, actually, right? And what actually Derek mentioned, that each parachain also works on certain solutions in terms of like optimization. We do so at Equilibrium as well. And the interesting point, like Derek mentioned, that some applications will be potentially like considering different parachains in terms of where to go to develop their applications on top of Polkadot, and definitely each parachain will consider certain optimization in order to provide kind of more convenient developer environments, right? So, for example, in Equilibrium, we're working on several features that are very DeFi specific. So, for example, we're developing the financial palette that will deliver some sophisticated math and financial functions to dev developers. And so obviously, we're taking care of the resources costs and how to optimize things overall from resource perspective.
Perfect. And let's end with this, because I've been seeing it pop up multiple times in the chat, and it's also so curious. Crispin asks, curious on the difference between Polkadot and Cosmos. And we don't have to go super in depth. Maybe you can kind of give us like 5 points. What are the main differentiators?
I mean, I'll throw my towel in the ring here. So, and obviously I'll caveat first and say that I'm way more familiar with Polkadot and Substrate than I am with Cosmos and Cosmos SDK. But I mean, there are, if you look out at all the universe of all the different blockchains out there, there's definitely more similarities than there are differences. in the sense that both projects are focused on creating kind of a toolkit that makes building blockchains easier. So in the case of Polkadot, that's Substrate. In the case of Cosmos, it's called the Cosmos SDK. And I think that itself is just worth dwelling on for a moment because, I think Peter was mentioning some of this before, that, it's kind of really hard to build like your own blockchain from scratch. And, both of those frameworks, kind of dramatically reduce like the energy needed to make your own blockchain. So, I mean, that is definitely a huge innovation. For us ourselves, the Substrate was kind of the better choice given like what we were trying to accomplish. But, there's, the Cosmos SDK, obviously has, a bunch of teams that have deployed on it. So you kind of have these frameworks that are two choices of frameworks you can use to build your own blockchain. And there's both projects have some concept of interoperability tied to them. Cosmos is kind of working on its IBC protocol. Right now Polkadot, as we've discussed, has its interoperability features. Where I see kind of the differences is they start to get more subtle. It's basically the frameworks themselves are quite a bit different. So even just the language, right? So like Cosmos SDK is Go based, Substrate is like Rust based. So that could already be something that might matter to people. And again, I'll just say an example for us. We needed very like low level control over kind of customizing the environment, and Substrate was just way better for what we were trying to accomplish, trying to create this like as close as we could make it to Ethereum, but implemented as its own parachain on as its own kind of parachain like that. Substrate was a much better choice for that. The design of the system is the other thing I'd point out, where it's kind of like, I'll describe it this way, that Cosmos has like a more like a little bit looser and more federated design, where each chain is kind of its own entity and needs to have its own kind of validators, and there's some ability for those kind of independent entities to talk to each other. Whereas Polkadot has what I'd call like a little bit more of a structured design. It's kind of a more hierarchical and structured design. And I think our conclusion on looking at this, because we were looking pretty carefully at both, even back last year, was that our belief is that this more structured design is going to lend itself to interoperability scenarios more easily than the kind of this like looser, more federated approach. So that's kind of the conclusion we reached. So those are a few thoughts there to throw out on that topic.
Alex, you want to give your thoughts before I jump in with my hammer?
I would try to be kind of diplomatic here. So I would say that, like as Derek actually mentioned, that Substrate's technology offers some certain level of customization, and when you're basically encoding your application on top of Substrate, you're basically programming the runtime of Substrate, right, with all kind of out-of-the-box features that you can utilize. So basically various like consensus models and all these kind of things that are implemented within the Substrate technology. With all due respect, Cosmos doesn't offer this level of flexibility. And, I think that maybe one of the key points here that obviously Polkadot is a way more centralized system than any other system that offers cross-chain interoperability in the moment. So we again, like building things on Rust is actually delivers the different developer experience, right? Because obviously the Rust is its technology is super focused on optimizing working with memory, compared to Go, which is absolutely different story. And we definitely respect the guys who actually have chosen, like Gavin Wood's team, that chosen this technology in order to build the scalable and actually interoperable system.
Yeah, and that's actually been a huge part of why we've been able to build such technically sound, robust blockchain technology, is because at Parity we have a ton of core Rust developers, sort of people who are contributing to the development of the language over the past couple of years, and many of them care about Rust more than they care about blockchains, and that's great for us because right now blockchains are the coolest thing you can build using Rust, and they're really phenomenal developers we have helping build Substrate and Polkadot, and then hopefully teams like Equilibrium and Moonbeam are able to leverage that then to the next level. So I'll say I don't disagree with any of Alex or Derek's points around Cosmos, but I would say it is very much an apples to oranges comparison. A couple of things off the top: Cosmos is not sharded. It is doesn't have even we haven't really addressed really the governance. Obviously, we're talking about interoperability, but we haven't really talked much about the governance of Polkadot and that the options it gives parachain teams in terms of tools for building their own native governance. But I think the best way that you can think of Polkadot versus Cosmos is a lot like a proof of stake version of using like a side chain on Ethereum today. So it's like side chains for Tendermint, whereas you could use side chains like XDAI on Ethereum, but it's just proof of stake instead of proof of work. So there's obviously quite a bit of work that they've done sort of pushing forwards in terms of the customizability of blockchains and providing a network for customized blockchains to interact with each other. But as we mentioned before, IBC, again, is also really just a value transfer interoperability protocol and doesn't give the arbitrary data transfer that Polkadot's going to give. So it is sort of closer to this side chains for Tendermint with atomic swaps rather than a scalable multi-chain sharded solution that provides really true interoperability for its native chains, in addition to robust bridges to major external chains that also allow for those cross-chain contract calls that are not possible with something like Cosmos. So I'd say that Polkadot's a lot closer to Ethereum 2.0 than Cosmos, but built for more interoperable, customizable development rather than just like sort of a general purpose protocol like Ethereum.
That's a good way to put it. Peter, you laid down the hammer. Perfect.
Thank you.
It's destroyed, annihilated. I hear the fire in your voice. Nice.
Appreciate it.
Guys, this has been great. I think we're going to wrap it up right now. We're getting ready for QA. And before I kind of give the bridge into QA and what that means exactly, can the three of you give us more details as to where we can find you, where we can learn more about your project? And then we'll kind of transition to the networking. So we can start with Alex, work our way from Derek, and end with Peter.
Yeah, so it's quite easy to find us on the internet. Our website is equilibrium.io. Please feel free to reach out, to ask any questions, join our Telegram community, which is pretty active last days, and yeah, looking forward to being in touch.
Yeah, and Moonbeam, you can find us. Our website is just moonbeam.network, and you can find links to most of the other places where we are from there.
And Polkadot.network is the website, at Polkadot on Twitter. I am at PAMAURIC on Twitter, but you can reach any of our team members on any of those outlets in addition to joining our Telegram group. We got a lot of active community members in there, but I urge you all to get in touch with Alex and Derek and what they're working on, because they really are the future of what's going to make Polkadot successful.
I love it. That's awesome. And now we're going to bridge into the networking session, which honestly, I love the discussions, but it's my favorite part of Blockchain and Booze, because what's going to happen, I'm going to end presentation mode and we're all going to distribute to all these colorful tables where we'll be able to basically bounce around chair to chair and meet all the attendees who join the discussion. And Alex, Derek, Peter, if you guys have time, we'd love for you guys to stick around, because I know people are still hammering the chat with more questions about Polkadot. They're eager to learn more about you guys, about oracles, and if ETH and Polkadot can live together, et cetera, et cetera. Chainlink. There you go. So I'm going to end presentation mode, but before I do, guys, thank you so much. You guys,
thanks for having us.
It was a great discussion. You got it. One last cheers to Polkadot and the future of Web3. And before we break off, yeah, Alex, you finished your tea, your whiskey tea. There you go. I love it. Now, I'm going to break off into networking mode. Guys, make sure you have your cameras on. Make sure you have your mics on. Otherwise, you're going to be completely lost as to what's going on. Okay, so mics on, cameras on, and let's do it. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.